Welcome to Resolutions, the official podcast of the American Bar Association section of dispute resolution. Every episode is a journey into the heart of conflict resolution, guided by our diverse community of experts. We're here to explore innovative strategies, share wisdom from the field, and inspire excellence in resolving disputes. Whether you're a dispute resolution professional, a curious learner, or someone passionate about fostering understanding and peace, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how we can transform conflict into opportunity together.
I'm here with Gabrielle Hartley, lawyer and mediator, to discuss a day in the life of a divorce lawyer and mediator. Gabrielle has over 25 years experience mediating mid to high conflict divorces, which she now offers exclusively online. She has dedicated her career to advocating for a positive divorce process for parents and children. Gabrielle is also an educator, author, former co-chair of the American Bar Association Mediation Committee, and is presently an ABA Dispute Resolution Section Council member. Her work has emphasized creating accessible legal services and promoting amicable resolutions in divorce proceedings. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
All right. Before we, and I'm excited to present on this topic today because nothing could be further than what I do in my day-to-day at the American Arbitration Association as a commercial vice president than family law, divorce law, or anything like that. So I wanted to briefly discuss, you've been quite involved with the American Bar Association Dispute Resolution Section, particularly the Mediation Committee. Can you share a bit about your role and what the committee focuses on?
Sure. Thanks so much. At the ABA Mediation Committee, for the last several years, I was co-chair, and every single month, second Wednesday of each month, I don't know if the new co-chairs have changed that, we offer full programming where we have different dynamic speakers come to present on different angles, aspects, and interests in the field of mediation. Most of the mediators, or at least more than half of the mediators, are actually not in the family law space, but it really doesn't matter. It's all about how do we de-escalate the most entrenched conflict and bring people to a resolution that is reasonable. And I just love it. I am now working on the Mediation Institute, which is coming up really soon on October 16th and 17th. And if you are a mediator, thinking about becoming a mediator, looking for some inspiration, some collegial conversations, I really highly recommend anyone listening, if this does come out before then, that there's my little infomercial, sorry to take up your airspace, that you sign up for the American Bar Association Mediation Institute. It is always a really dynamic, wonderful experience.
And I would just say to that, and I'm not giving this plug because I'm the former educational programming officer for the dispute resolution section, and I'm also a current council member with Gabrielle, but I tell people if you're interested in actually doing ADR for a career, right, and not just a hobby, this is basically your trade group. The American Bar Association Dispute Resolution Section is your trade group, and I've learned more from other arbitrators, other mediators, other people in the section than I have in any other way. Iron sharpens iron, as they say, right? And you're learning from experienced professionals in the field, not just people that about it or talk about it, but actually are practicing neutrals. And there's nothing better than being a member of the American Bar Association Dispute Resolution Section and attending these events. The Practice Institute and some of the programming that was run at the spring conference, I thought was really good, and got a lot of positive feedback on that. Thank you for that.
I just want to add one thing. I think it's really wonderful. The thing that I've loved so much about it is that because you're going to be mixing with people from across the country, you really get new viewpoints that you don't get when you're just a member of your local bar. I think a lot of us, I was guilty of the same thing for a long time. You get really deep in the trenches of where you work, but your skill set really gets sharpened. You said it really perfectly, Aaron, when you are cross-pollinating your knowledge with other people's knowledge, because what's happening on one side of the country or even within your own state may vastly differ from the way you do things. And when you get more tools to your toolkit, you can provide a better service. Anyway, okay.
I agree 100%. And what you mentioned there about regional differences in how ADR is conducted, that's really interesting. And that's something every time I go to one of these conferences or conventions or log into one of the webinars, I really enjoy learning about how mediation and arbitration are conducted in other parts of the country and even other parts of the world. We shouldn't just say the group is a domestic group, but we have members in the section from all over the world. So
Obviously, the two of us love the ABA.
right, I know. I know.
I
We're big
know, I know.
ABA, we're big ABA DR section fans for sure. And
We
I like all the other sections that I'm a part of. I'm sure you're part of the family law section and some of the other ones, but the DR one is particularly close to my heart.
likewise.
All right. We'll start with the basics. What exactly is divorce mediation and how does it differ from the traditional divorce mediation, traditional divorce process? And you might want to explain by starting what is the traditional divorce process?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to do. So traditionally, when you're getting divorced, each person would hire an attorney and then you go to court and you battle it out as though it's a car accident or a contract case. And the judge is looking to clear their docket and get everybody in the most fair situation as they can possibly come up with in a couple of hours and serve the best interest of the children. And your lawyers are there to advocate for you. They're not thinking about like the ongoing toxic violence that can be caused to your family, all the collateral damage that can ensue post a divorce litigation situation. And so you basically are coming at your divorce, typically traditionally, with two advocates who are each serving as your gladiator. And then the stranger in black robes is deciding your life. And for some situations that is necessary, but most of the time, people really have a good idea of what's going to serve their family best. And even if you need a little bit of assistance with an attorney, which I really prefer that my clients do have, because the educated consumer is always the best customer. But the thing about mediation is you're involving a third party neutral, the mediator, to help you to unravel your financial entanglements and to manage where your children or child is going to be, when, where, how, and with whom. And it's much more civilized. What I really love about the mediation process is you're really setting a template for how things can be going forward by engaging in multiple sessions where you're reframing and looking at things with a slightly different lens. Very oftentimes you can avoid having the ongoing circular loop of battle that only gets escalated if you go to court. So
now I've got to ask you, because you're an attorney, you're an advocate as well as a mediator. Do you still take on regular family law cases where you represent people getting divorced, correct? In addition to your mediation practice?
I'll do a collaborative case depending on certain factors, but generally when it comes to high-level litigation, I'm more likely to refer high-level litigation to some of the really wonderful litigators that I work with. I really stay at this point in my lane. I did a lot of litigation for many years. There are parts of it that are fun, but it is not really where I want to put my energy at this point in time.
All right, makes sense. Because I was going to ask you, if you were still representing as an advocate in high conflict cases, can you take your mediator cap off for a second and offer that high level of advocacy, keeping the two separate? But it sounds like you're concentrating more on ADR and mediation at this point.
I'm really concentrated on de-escalating and on having things move forward in a better way. Now, I happen to balance the room a lot because I'm very aware of the concept of coercive control that happens, which is something that's a little bit more insidious than the straight up domestic violence. And I do a lot of breakout rooms. I do, like I said, like everything online. I really do my best to do a little light advocacy within the room so people can self-advocate. And my hope, dream, wish is that when they're done with me, not to say that they can really self-advocate quite as well as they can with a little bit of support, but hopefully it's a little bit better than it was before they've gone through the mediation process.
Sure. Okay, what does a typical day look like for you as a divorce mediator and attorney just in general?
It looks like a lot of back-to-back meetings with people who are not happy and trying to bring them from a place of, as I'd say, like a 10 in the emotional category down to maybe a 4 or 5. And then in the afternoons, I typically spend about 2 hours or so fielding calls from clients. I work a little bit differently than a lot of other mediators. I don't work hourly. People pay me for my time, and I limit my practice to a certain number of clients at any one time so that I have availability to actually be present for them. So it's a lot of high touch conversations with both the litigants, if they have lawyers, the parties, and also sometimes I spend time talking to their financial advisors and what have you. It's a lot of talking and listening.
And that's important to mention that there are a lot of other professionals in the process. There are financial advisors, there are accountants. If there is real property that is jointly owned and that has to be disposed of, there's going to be real estate agents and things like that. I know I've seen mortgage broker specialists that specialize in figuring out what to do with the mortgage when both people's names are on it and people
That's
are
right.
getting divorced.
That's absolutely right. There's a certified divorce financial analyst. There's divorce coaches. The list goes on. And depending on the person, it really can get quite complex. Sometimes it's just 2 people and no lawyers. It's a very personal decision. And that's something that I really like about mediation. But again, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, should I mediate? Should I not mediate? It's really always best to know what your rights would be, not because you have to go for all of them, but before you walk away from them, you should understand so you're not kicking yourself later, or even worse, maybe blaming the other person and then kicking yourself also. So it's a double whammy that you can avoid by just getting a little bit of information.
Could you share a recent case or situation that stands out in your practice? I'm sure there's lots of them, but just something that particularly was of interest, might be of interest to our listeners.
Oh, gee, that is a difficult one. Maybe let's circle back to that if we have time at the end.
All right. Obviously, divorce can be a highly emotional process. I'm not saying that conflict in general isn't highly emotional, but specifically when you're dealing with family issues and stuff like that, especially if there's child custody issues and large stakes of money at stake, whatnot. How do you help your clients manage their emotions and keep the process constructive?
So that is really a great question. And that's really important. It's very difficult. Even when people say they want to have an amicable divorce, if you are a mediator and you're listening to this, don't be surprised if it feels a little bit heated, or if you open the Zoom room and you turn on the camera and there's somebody with a expression on their face and they do not look happy to be there, even if you've already had a couple of other positive meetings. Generally, what I do my very best at doing is to consistently try to balance the room and to give people space to take space. So what do I mean by that? When I was still working in person, I would invite the participants to not at the same time, but to separately take a walk around the block, go get a drink of water, go grab a cup of coffee and come back. With a clear mind, with a clear head, we have better decision making and there's more space for possibility. I do a lot of work trying to move people off of their position. So what do I mean by that? People get really stuck on what they want, and when we're stuck in positional conversations, the dynamic tends to escalate and get worse. But if we can understand why they want what they want, why do they want to keep the house? Why do they need to? Like, we're moving away from what they want to why they need it. Just by changing the conversation, that actually goes a long way to bring down the emotion, because the person's brain is starting to cool off as they're starting to think about solving for the thing they want. So then the next logical thing that I'll ask is, how would your life be different if you had that thing? If they don't know why they want what they want, I ask them questions to get at how their life would be different. So it may be that somebody doesn't really care about keeping the house, but they're afraid if they don't keep the house, their kids are never going to come and visit them. And so all I have to do is come up with an interim parenting plan for a couple of weeks or months and encourage the person who's maybe moving out to let the kids decorate their rooms themselves, to do something to make them feel safe, that in fact their kids are going to still visit them and spend lots of time with them, even if they're out of the house. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. And it's really what stood out to me is people have to understand why they want what they want, not just that they want something. I think perhaps part of our society is just getting more than the other person, but not actually having any science behind why we want that. And it's not necessarily a competition. Divorce obviously is a very sad time in people's lives, and you want to fully understand what possessions mean to people and understand the thought process behind it.
And it's sometimes even more. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe this is answering the question that I asked to come back to later, like a hard situation. Sometimes you've got a double divorce. Those are really hard, meaning it's just one couple. I don't mean two couples divorcing at once. One couple's getting divorced, but they also have a business together. And maybe they both love the business, but one person does more of the management side, the other person does more of the day-to-day operations, and they really need each other in order to continue to run the business. And sometimes I've had to help couples figure out how to make that pivot without completely divorcing the business side. And sometimes there's co-ownership of buildings. It can get really complicated and it gets very interesting also. I've been doing this a long time because I love it. It's really fun when people come in and they feel quite powerless, or when they come in with lawyers. I do settlement cases also. They come in with lawyers and they've been in court a whole bunch of times and they're waiting for a trial date. And then I feel like I help them to reach resolution. I'm actually not doing anything. I'm just making space and de-escalating. I like, if you were to say, what is my primary role? It is to be a de-escalating, refocusing machine.
Let me ask you this, and this is just something that popped into my head. I came from the tort mediation world before I got into commercial arbitration. And one thing that in tort mediation, a lot of these personal injury, medical malpractice, whatnot, is the power of an apology.
Oh.
Now, we know in law that apologies are seen as weak. An apology is essentially the same as admitting guilt in some people's minds. Can you talk about the power of apology in divorce mediation and if that actually has a cash value to it to move people along?
Yeah, so that is such a great question. And I think it's a really interesting answer because so often they'll say they just want an apology. And the other side will say, I've apologized 500 times. But I say, all right, let's do it 501 times with me here, because now there's a witness to the apology, right? And so now I'm saying, okay, I heard her say she's sorry for X, Y, or Z. Did you hear that? Can you say it again? I'm sorry. Can you say it again? Is there another way you would like her to say it? Should she write it? Like, by amplifying the apology, obviously I'm exaggerating a little and you don't want to make the person get defensive who is apologizing. Right. But this is different than a tort case which, especially if there's like a criminal component, you don't want any admissions of guilt, implicit or explicit. But in a divorce, it's really different. A lot of it just has to do with respect. It's not going to be outcome determinative as to what the division of assets or the custody situation is going to be. It's literally just to get the person who is upset to engage, to get their emotions. I'm making my hand motion to show, like, so their emotions are, the fingers are flailing about and the thinking brain is just not able to think. But then when you say you're sorry, their emotional brain, I don't know if anyone can see this, you're clasping down on your free floating thinking brain, which is like completely out of control. And the apology can calm things down. You apologize, you take a break. And I, as the mediator, might say something. I'm a little outrageous. Sometimes I might say something like, it sounds like you feel like your whole life was a lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, she gets it.
Right.
My life was a lie. She gets it. She might cry a little. And guess what? Everything comes together.
Yes. Yes.
It just needs to be heard.
It's a little bit like in psychology, they talk about a breakthrough or something like that. But actually, that leads me into my next question perfectly. Your approach emphasizes a positive divorce process. Do you want to quickly describe what that is and how it benefits individuals and families?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of this has been a personal journey for me. In as much as my parents were divorced, I have not been divorced, but I grew up in a divorced household. And interestingly, I used to catch myself saying, when I was divorced, but of course I wasn't divorced. And I would say, oh, that's so weird. But then I started, and this is when I was young, I would hear other people say it. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I heard somebody say when I got divorced, and I was like, you were not divorced. But as for the kid, you do feel, or at least I can speak for myself and anecdotally, the people who I've heard say it, the divorce impacts kids, even if it is a good one. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of shame associated with divorce. I think there's a feeling of failure that people associate with divorce, not just the people getting divorced, but they're looked at by other people as somehow failing. And so the narrative of yourself, the divorcing person, as well as your children, is really impacted by this pervasive sense of shame.
Hmm.
And so when I first wrote Better Apart, which is about having a positive divorce, it was in People magazine and the New York Times and all kinds of places. And it was really interesting. Like, I did some like local television, but the bigger stations really didn't want to talk about divorce. It's just such an unseemly conversation. And now Kate Anthony just wrote this book called The D Word. And it's been 6 years since, or 5.5 years since Better Apart came out. And now it's starting to become more of the vernacular in the conversation. It's a little bit less. It might be the echo chamber that I'm living in my profession, but I do feel like the concept of using the word positive may not actually mean positive, but it's intentionally shifting from the extreme negative with the goal of getting neutral. Does that make sense?
Makes
No.
sense. That makes
Okay.
perfect sense. And I would just ask you, do you think, like I said, the shame associated with divorce is lightening up a little bit, considering that what, roughly 50% of all marriages in this country end in divorce? It's not like it's an uncommon thing. And also the other thing to that point too is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm just generally analyzing this, I'm not looking at stats. Less people are getting married and people are choosing to get married a lot later in life. So if there are less marriages and people choosing to get married later in life, I'd assume whatever stigma is associated with divorce is easing.
I would like to say, yes, it's definitely easing, because in my echo chamber, it is easing. But I don't know that I can say across the country, like really, truly, whether it's easy, it has eased. I think that it's certainly in the last 50 years changed dramatically and lightened up somewhat.
Right.
But because it is much more common. But remember, the 50% number, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's not 50% of all people get divorced. It's 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And the majority are two-time offenders.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Okay. So could be multiple offenders within the stat, right?
yeah. And if you look across the country, different regions have higher and lower divorce rates. So I like to think that all the hundreds of hours that I spent talking about the positive divorce movement has had some help in moving things along, and some great podcasts on moving divorce and beyond with Susan Guthrie, et cetera, has really helped people to feel empowered. Because when you think about it, why are you getting divorced? You're getting divorced. At the end, there might be a condition precedent that's really obvious, but at the end of the day, you're getting divorced so that your life is better, right? That might not be the proximate cause of the divorce, but actually that is the net effect, so that you're not with somebody who you're unhappy with, or who, quite frankly, doesn't appreciate you.
All right. I know this isn't a Gabrielle Hartley promotional podcast, but I'm just going to ask. You're known for the Better Apart process and the Yes method. Could you briefly explain how these aid in the conflict resolution process?
Sure. So the Better Apart method is basically 5 steps to ask yourself questions to help elevate how you feel internally while you're going through this external divorce, right? So it's to look at your divorce through the lens of patience, peace, clarity, forgiveness, right? And respect. And they're all about you. Self-respect, being peaceful may just mean being neutral, getting clear. What do you want in your divorce? Like, sometimes people come in and they're like, oh, I want what's fair. What does that mean? It's going to mean something different to you and to the person you're divorcing. So it's a whole inquiry. And through these 5 lenses, you can really radically empower yourself to feel better. That was created together with a meditation and yoga teacher, Elena Brower. And it's made a lot of people have more successful divorces. I've gotten so many letters from people, and that was like a little wonderful pause in my practice to take the time out and give back for people who I can't work with one-to-one, to have just some knowledge dropped on them that I'm not in the space to share with them. And then the Yes method is from my newest book, which is The Secret to Getting Along. So I'll summarize it as quickly and clearly as I can. So In order to resolve a conflict, we need to understand why we want what we want, why we need what we want, rather. So the yes method is why for your role in the conflict, E for what's the emotional story or the motivation, and the S is for shelving heated conversations. So really, you're trying to get to the E, because when we understand why we want what we want, then we make space for possibilities. We make space to look at, oh, if that might give me this, like that might give me money, or that might give me security, or whatever the thing is that you're seeking. Now, how do you get to the E? You're doing some behavior that's interfering with your clarity because you are emotionally dysregulated. So you're either minimizing what's going on, catastrophizing what's going on, burying your head in the sand, steamrollering, stirring the pot. You're doing all these behaviors that we all do when we are feeling pressed or anxious, right? So the S is for shelving the conversation. Think of shelving as taking a pause. When you take that pause, then you invite yourself to say, what's really going on here for me? Because when you understand what's going on for you emotionally, and if you have the courage or the bravery to share, or at least to share with the mediator and let the mediator talk about it to your soon-to-be ex, you're allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, the other person is more likely to be empathetic. And when they're empathetic, they are more likely to either, number one, give you what you want, number two, to share what they need. Oh, that's what you really need? Now, you didn't just tell them, do the yes method, but they say, right? They're going to want to, there's going to be the instinct to mirror back.
Yes.
And so then you might feel some empathy for them. So
Right.
It's like really cool. It's this kind of thinking is very automatic for some of us, but not so automatic for other people. So by breaking it down, you can look at conflict a little bit differently.
It's like almost essentially like mutual empathy, if you will, right?
That's the goal, because when you have mutual empathy, then we have agreements, and then we're out of a job.
All right. I guess on a more serious note, retaliation and conflict are common fears during divorce proceedings. How do you address these concerns with your clients to ensure a fair and safe process for both parties? I really hope you don't have a lot of situations to deal with domestic violence and things like that, but I know it's probably part of the process, right?
So in my practice, I really try very hard to screen people out. If there's domestic violence, and it's actually physical violence and it's not that coercive control. In fact, they might be better for mediation, which is online, depending, obviously not if there's a protective order in place or there's actual fear to the extent where they're still living together or something like that. It's very case by case. But what's sometimes even more dangerous is when there's coercive control, because that's more insidious. And that's where the person really doesn't feel free to self-advocate. They might not even be able to think about what's truly going to serve their children or them the best. They just want to be done. They just want to be away. Right. In those cases, sometimes they'll walk away from money. They'll walk away from support. They'll walk away. They'll just walk away from things that they really shouldn't, just to avoid the confrontation. It's almost like being agreeable to the max, right? But what I see more as a problem in mediation, because those people generally, I would tell them they're not really a good fit and I'd send them to a litigator, quite frankly, or I would invite them to come in with their lawyers. That's fine too. But what I see as a more ongoing issue is the person who's really agreeable agrees before they've thought it through. And then they come back and the person who they agreed with thinks there's a deal, and they're like, oh, we were just talking, that's just, there was no real agreement, etc. So I really try to caution people not to say yes unless they mean it. Say, I need some time. Say, let me think about this. That's all part of the better apart method and the yes method too. Taking that pause before you say okay, because if you say okay and you don't understand what it means, or you don't mean it but you don't know how to say it, you're going to escalate the argument.
And to that point, I was going to ask, in general, commercial mediation or mediation of other types, let's say parties come in, they do a full day mediation session on an auto accident case or something like that. And at the end of the day, the parties are not in agreement on what the settlement figure should be. In situations like that, sometimes the mediator will draft a mediator proposal, what they think is best. Now, in our conversation in the last couple of minutes, I can tell that you're more of a facilitative mediator than an evaluative mediator. You're not going to tell people what they should do or what they should take. But is a mediator proposal something that's ever used in kind of the divorce mediation practice?
So it's really interesting. That's how I'm coming across, because I'm actually quite evaluative. But I guess maybe because in the last few years since Better Apart came out, I do mediate across the whole country, which means I can't be evaluative because I don't know the law in different areas, different jurisdictions. And so I will basically tell people when they hire me in New York or Massachusetts, where I'm licensed and practice and have a robust understanding of the law, I ask them if they want me to give my 2 cents. And they'll often say, what's normal, what's reasonable, what can we do? I don't put it in writing because it's so personal to people. And I really think that there's too big a danger that they're going to say, look, the mediator said this made sense. Why are you arguing with her? So it's better for me to say, oh, I'm going to give you 3 different options that might make sense. See how you feel. It's true. I might say, depending on the people, see how you feel in your body. That's one I use, which sounds not mediation, not lawyerly, but I do that also purposefully because it de-escalates the anxiety of the people in the room. Or even if they're like laughing at me a little, it's calming them down because they're like, oh, who is this woman? But they'll know that I have tons and tons of experience, even though I'm doing something in a bit of a non-conventional way. And so it makes the whole experience a little less scary, a little more relatable. And when people feel relaxed, their guard is down, and they're more agreeable.
Yes, no, I totally agree. All right, we only have a few minutes left here. What backgrounds do divorce mediators typically come from? And for those interested in becoming a divorce mediator, what advice do you have?
Backgrounds, lawyers and therapists are often divorce mediators. There are people who just are not lawyers or therapists, and they just get a training in mediation. I would really caution any mediator who has not practiced divorce law. This is my own bias, but I would absolutely require your clients to at least have a consultation or 2 with a lawyer to find out what their rights are. And also be careful that whatever agreements you make are clear and unequivocal. I can tell you, I used to clerk for a judge in New York, where part of my job was to help people reach resolution, but another part of my job was to review agreements that had gone sideways. And there are so many mediated agreements that are full with agreements to agree, with language that is not clear and unequivocal. And there's so much room for later disagreement. You want to make sure that whatever you write is tied up really tightly so that we always know where the kids are, with whom, when, etc. So a good start would be to do a online or an in-person mediation training, depending what's near you. I know Guthrie does a great mediation online training. And then I would not stop with just a 40-hour, absolutely not. I would shadow a mediator if you can find somebody who you can do that with. Lots of courts have a lot of opportunities. You can start with maybe some small claim work just to get your mediation brain going, start thinking about
a lot of pro bono mediation panels within the courts and things like that.
Exactly. And then I do think, if I could be so brazen as to circle back to where we began with the Mediation Institute. I would say definitely, if you're thinking about doing divorce mediation, actually, I'm on a panel together with Michael Xavier from Boston and Meredith McBride. We're going to be talking about pitfalls in mediated agreements for family law specifically. There's a lot of really great speakers who are going to be there. It's October 16th and 17th. There's breakout rooms where you can make conversation with people and you can write notes to the other participants, et cetera, and really connect. And you don't have to travel. So of course, I always miss in-person things, but it's also much more likely that you'll be able to make it, because all you have to do is turn on your computer and pop in for whatever sounds interesting to you. And if you go to if you just Google actually American Bar Association Mediation Institute and click on the brochure, you can check out all the people who are going to be there. It's really going to be a great experience.
Okay, this has been fantastic. Gabrielle, this has been an enlightening discussion. Thank you for sharing your insights and expertise with us.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to be here.
All right. And we'll see everybody at the Institute.
Thank you for joining us on Resolutions. Today's episode has illuminated the powerful impact of effective dispute resolution and showcased the incredible individuals who dedicate themselves to this important work. Our mission is to explore the diverse world of dispute resolution, and we hope we've inspired you to engage with conflict and collaboration in new ways. If you're not yet a member of the ABA section of dispute resolution, we invite you to join our community of professionals making a difference. Your involvement can help us build a more harmonious society together. And if you found value in our conversations, please consider leaving us a review and a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback helps us reach more people and continue our journey towards excellence in dispute resolution. Until next time, keep solving problems, building bridges, and creating positive changes in your communities.